Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into Episode 4, The July Crisis. We're going to unpack one of the most astonishing and, frankly, tragic chain reactions in human history. We'll be looking at how a highly localized assassination in the Balkans somehow spiraled into the catastrophic First World War in just over a single month. It is a terrifying reminder of how quickly the modern world can completely shatter.
Think about it. It's kind of the ultimate historical puzzle, right? How on earth did we get from a single gunshot in Sarajevo to a global conflict of unprecedented scale? And maybe the even bigger question, why couldn't the world's most powerful and experienced diplomats just put a stop to it? Today, we're going to track the decisions, the wild miscommunications, and the incredibly rigid military schedules that turned a regional crisis into a world-shattering war.
To wrap our heads around the sheer speed of this disaster, we really have to look at the ticking clock of July 1914. This was a rapid, almost dizzying sequence of falling dominoes, where every single diplomatic misstep tipped the next one over. From the assassination on June 28th to the formal declaration of war on July 28th, we have a mere 31 days. In just 1 month, the fate of millions was completely sealed, setting off this massive chain reaction that nobody seemed able to halt.
Let's start with Section 1, the spark and the check. So let's set the scene. It's June 28, 1914, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Now, for Austria-Hungary, this tragic event wasn't just a moment of deep national mourning. For the more hawkish officials in Vienna, it was actually a highly convenient excuse. They saw a golden opportunity here to crush Serbia and permanently eliminate the pan-Slavic movement on their borders. They wanted to end that threat once and for all. But there was a massive catch. Austria-Hungary knew they couldn't just march in and act alone against Serbia. Doing that meant risking a devastating war with Serbia's incredibly powerful protector, Russia. So Austro-Hungarian diplomats, like Count Albert von Mensdorf, realized they absolutely needed a rock-solid guarantee from their own powerful ally, Germany, before making a single move. And that brings us right to the first fatal miscalculation. On July 5th, Kaiser Wilhelm II handed Austria-Hungary what we now famously call the blank check. It was an unconditional promise of German support for literally whatever action Austria-Hungary chose to take. But the assumptions driving this check were just disastrous. German leaders really believed Austria would strike rapidly, making it a done deal before anyone could react. They also reckoned Tsarist Russia simply wasn't militarily ready to risk a general war. And they mistakenly assumed that the Russian Tsar's sense of monarchical solidarity, standing against the murder of a fellow royal, would completely outweigh his pan-Slavic ties to Serbia. They were catastrophically wrong on all counts.
Which leads us to Section 2, the impossible ultimatum.
Armed with that absolute German guarantee, Austria-Hungary drafted a document that was, honestly, designed to be flat-out rejected. Delivered on July 23rd, almost a full month after the assassination, this ultimatum was staggering. It demanded that Serbia suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda and, most shockingly, allow Austro-Hungarian officials to operate straight inside Serbian borders. It was a blatant, highly calculated infringement on a sovereign nation's rights. They were basically asking Serbia to give up its independence.
But the real kicker? This number right here, 48. Austria-Hungary gave Serbia a measly 48 hours to unconditionally accept these harsh demands. And that time frame was not random at all. It was perfectly, coldly timed by military leaders to align perfectly with Austro-Hungarian military mobilization schedules. The whole thing was designed to force a failure.
Moving right along to Section 3, Serbia's masterful reply.
Now, the tension at this point was absolutely electric. While Austria demanded total, humiliating submission, Serbia pulled off a diplomatic masterstroke that stunned everyone in Europe. They cleverly accepted almost every single point. The only thing they rejected was allowing foreign Austro-Hungarian officers to operate within their legal system, which obviously violated their constitution. And for anything left unresolved, they calmly offered to go to international arbitration at The Hague. It was just an incredibly measured response to an absolutely outrageous demand.
The reply was so well crafted that even Baron Musolin, the actual Austro-Hungarian official who drafted the harsh ultimatum in the first place, called it the most brilliant exercise in diplomatic virtuosity. Yet, despite Serbia basically giving in, the Austro-Hungarian ambassador already had his strict orders. He severed diplomatic ties mere minutes after reading the reply. Make no mistake, the goal here was always war, not negotiation.
So, that was it. Diplomacy officially failed. Austria-Hungary flat-out refused to negotiate, refused the Hague Tribunal entirely, and on July 28, 1914, they officially declared war on Serbia. They pulled the first major trigger, and all those rigid alliance systems across the continent snapped into place. The local crisis was officially over, and the global catastrophe had begun.
Let's look at Section 4, the Willie-Nicky telegrams.
It is just wild to think about. As troops are literally massing on the borders, the leaders of these two colossal opposing empires were actually first cousins, desperately texting each other via telegram in English, trying to stop a war. Tsar Nicholas of Russia, affectionately signing his messages as Nicky, basically pleaded with his cousin to stop Austria. Look at his words here. "I foresee that very soon I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure forced upon me." It really puts a spotlight on the tragic human element behind this. These absolute monarchs were suddenly realizing they were completely losing control to their own vast military machines.
But Willie fired back. He claimed that because Russia had already started mobilizing its troops, mediation was completely off the table. Wilhelm shifted the blame entirely onto Nicholas, writing that the whole weight of the decision lies solely on your shoulders now. Both of these massive empires were hurtling towards a clash, using personal, late-night telegrams not to actually find a solution, but to clearly establish who was at fault when the inevitable finally happened.
Finally, Section 5, the Schlieffen Plan dominoes.
This is where military logistics hammer the final nail in the coffin of European peace. We've got to talk about Germany's infamous Schlieffen Plan, because this dictates literally everything that happens next. Germany was terrified of a two-front war against both France and Russia. So, their plan was a massive logistical gamble. Step 1, send 1.5 million men straight through neutral Belgium to crush France in just 6 weeks. Step 2, use their advanced railways to rapidly shift all those troops to the east. Step 3, defeat Russia, operating on the massive assumption that the huge Russian army would take a full 8 weeks to mobilize. Germany's entire survival strategy relied on a literal stopwatch.
Because this plan was absolutely rigid, relying entirely on down-to-the-minute railway timetables, there was literally zero room for diplomatic pauses. It was an unstoppable chain reaction. On July 31st, Russia mobilizes. For Germany, that meant the 8-week clock had officially started, and they had to invade France immediately. So, on August 1st, Germany and France mobilize, and Germany officially declares war on Russia. By August 4th, Germany invades neutral Belgium to get to France, which then forces Britain to enter the war. The dominoes just kept falling.
Ultimately, the July crisis reveals a deeply terrifying truth. Logistics completely overrode diplomacy. The political leaders, the Kaisers and Tsars sending their frantic telegrams, woke up to find that the military machinery they had built up over decades was simply too rigid to be paused. Once those mobilization orders were given, train schedules and deployment plans completely took over, steamrolling right over those desperate last-minute attempts at peace. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to ask ourselves, when we look back at those 37 days, was the First World War truly caused by active, malicious choices for global destruction? Or did it happen because systems of alliances, failed communication, and strict military schedules became so rigid that a tragic, localized event became a global inevitability? It's a heavy question, and it's one that still absolutely echoes in how we view international relations today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.